What do parents, plumbers, and CEOs have in common? Well, stay tuned as we begin a new series because this is great information for you to apply in your life. Stay tuned.
If your desire is to become spiritually stronger, emotionally healthier, and relationally smarter, you're at the right place. Speaker and writer Stephanie Smith inspires and equips you to achieve these three key aims. If you're a parent, you'll also learn how to raise empowered kids, ready for adulthood. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Godly Impact Podcast. Today I'm beginning a new series, and it's called You're in the People Business. And this applies, it doesn't matter whether you're a parent or not, married or single, any age, whether you are running a plumbing business or you are a corporate CEO. Now, it is a bold claim to make that there is a podcast episode, much less a series, that can truly apply to every person. But I think as you stay tuned, you're going to discover this is not just a bold claim, it's an accurate one. Do you know that there are 6 elements that make life on earth possible? If we did without any one of those elements, life on earth as we know it would cease to exist. That's right, just 6 elements. These are the kinds of elements that are found on that periodic table. Remember that from high school when you had to memorize all of those or some of those, and you wondered, well, maybe you wondered. Some of you probably didn't wonder, but most of us probably wondered, when am I ever going to need this in my life? Well, I have to be honest, I haven't found a whole lot of use for a periodic table throughout my life, but I'm going to use that as an analogy for the series that I'm beginning today. You're in the people business, because it is true. If you are a plumber, you're in the people business, okay? Toilets don't hire other toilets. It's not like one toilet gets unclogged and then sends a message through the sewer lines to other toilets, upstream or downstream. Hey, if you ever get clogged up, I've got a referral for you. No, people hire you. People refer you. Or people say, don't go with this company or don't go with this person. You are definitely in the people business if you are a parent, and you're in the people business even if your company is primarily about making widgets, because eventually those widgets get sold not to other widgets, but to people. So there are 6 elements that make life on earth possible. And one of those that makes every human relationship possible, whether it's a personal relationship or a business relationship, is what I call the oxygen of all relationships, and that is empathy. Now, hold on. You may immediately go, oh, great, here we go. Here's the sappy stuff. I'm supposed to have all these feelings and emotions and all these soft skills and blah, blah, blah. And I don't see how empathy has anything to do with my running my plumbing business or being a CEO, or, I mean, you might be able to understand that a little bit more. It might make a little bit more sense if you're still raising kids at home. But stick with me on this one, because I want to challenge maybe what your assumptions are about empathy and to be able to make a case for why I believe it is the oxygen of all human relationships. And again, whether your life is primarily spent in the raising of children or running a business or a nonprofit or just your personal relationships, your marriage, your friendships, all of those things, you're in the people business. I want you to think of empathy not so much as a feeling, but as a position. It is a perspective. It is a mindset. It is a choice. And I would suggest to you that empathy is withness. That's not witness like, FBI witness program. It's with, as in I am with you. It is being present alongside. It is standing. I can't stand in your shoes, but I can stand next to you. I can walk next to you. Empathy is withness. Empathy is I'm going to give you some things that empathy is not. First of all, empathy is not indulgence. Okay. When we have empathy, that doesn't mean that I just pat somebody on the back and I say, "Oh, you're so awesome and you're so amazing and oh, let me just whatever you want to do, I'm just there for you." That is not empathy. Empathy is being with. Several months ago within this last year, Cracker Barrel went through, well, they attempted to go through a corporate logo rebrand and also rebranding, remodeling some of their stores. And the backlash of that amongst their customers was so intense that that stock dropped up to 30%. That is a huge stock drop. And even though the then CEO survived that, the company took a major hard hit, not just in terms of its public relations, but in terms of its actual dollar value. Why did that happen? Well, it is because whoever was involved in all of that process, they were not empathetic with the customers. They lost their witness. They didn't do enough work to really figure out from the customer standpoint, the people that go to Cracker Barrel, not just once a year, but the people who are like, no, that's my place. That's where I love to go. They lost their empathy with those customers. The marketing company that put that together, Cracker Barrel definitely said, okay, we're not working with them anymore. So the whole cost of that in terms of that marketing company, I don't know what all that is, but I definitely know that they lost a major client. And my guess is they might have lost other clients or other clients that might have been potential clients that said, not working with them. So what was the cost of this? Well, the cost not just for Cracker Barrel, but for customers were upset. It caused a lot of stress for them. You had a marketing company that lost a client, and I don't know if people at the marketing company ended up losing their jobs or whatever. But why did all that happen? Because they lost their witness. And when you look at different companies that have failed over time, yes, there are a variety of different reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is because they lose their mindset and their commitment to being with their customers. Now, they say they are, but they don't actually put that into practice. We want to be with the people in our lives. If you are running a plumbing business, you have to understand what is your customer? What are their needs? What are their concerns? One of the biggest issues that I've heard for years, I know this is true, I've experienced it myself, not just in my local area, but as an industry, and that is that in the construction industry, one of the biggest complaints for people is when contractors just don't call them back. That's it. People would rather have a contractor call them back and say, hey, I'm not going to be able to make it today. We're not going to be able to do that job. Our price has gone up or something, but at least communicate. And instead, they just get ghosted. And why that continues to remain so prevalent in that industry, I don't know. Part of the reason that people are able to kind of get by with that is because of the shortage of people in the trades that we have. But a truly successful company will recognize what's it like to be that customer who got up and who thought that the crew was going to show up at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then they don't show up and they have no communication from that contractor. So they don't know, well, are they just running late? And at noon they still did something happen? Are they going to show up later today or tomorrow? That is a company that has no empathy. And empathy will eventually cost you, whether it is in your marriage, whether it is in your friendships as a parent, or in your company. So I already mentioned one of the things that empathy isn't. Empathy isn't indulgence. Empathy is not merely an emotion. And sometimes that's what we think. We think of empathy as just this soft skill. Oh, it's just this feeling that I have. I feel compassionate. I feel sorry for someone. Now, I would suggest to you that empathy does involve feelings, but I think it is far more than a feeling. You see, if we have feelings and emotions, but it never leads to action, it doesn't really help anybody. Now, to be certain, there is no way that we can take action on every single issue in life and every single need that we hear about in this world. We just can't. But in our circles of influence and in our relationships where we are able to take action, we need to realize that just having a feeling of being sorry about something or sad about something, or even having that perspective of I want to be with, I want to understand someone, we have to take action. True empathy leads to action. I would say that the greatest display of empathy as a believer was the coming of Christ to earth. It was God with us. I mean, that was what Jesus was all about. Emmanuel, what does it mean? It means God with us. God didn't need to come to earth to kind of figure out what human life was about. It's that we needed to see his empathy in action in a way that had a profound impact on us, that we knew. We didn't just hope, we didn't just think, but we knew God is with us. That is incredibly powerful, a powerful scriptural principle for all of us. The other thing that empathy is not excusing people. And again, this kind of goes with indulgence, but it's a little bit different because we can have these feelings and everything, and it can lead to indulgence, which again is not empathy. But sometimes there are things that people do that are wrong, and they need to be held accountable. Empathy and accountability are not opposites. They do not contradict one another. Oftentimes, they actually complement one another. Sometimes it is holding someone accountable that is the most empathetic thing that you can do for them. I mean, God holds us accountable. No matter what our life story is, we're still held accountable for how we show up in this world. That isn't opposite God's empathy. It is the overflow. It is the outcome of his empathy. So don't confuse empathy with, oh, I just let people off the hook and I have no boundaries and I have no compassion or I have no transparency. I don't require transparency or accountability. That's not what empathy is. Empathy is not about excusing people. So what is empathy? I'm going to give you 3 specific things that I believe shows the presence of genuine empathy in our lives. Empathy is understanding people even when you don't agree with them. I can understand a lot of people's perspectives, even though I don't at all agree with them, even on moral issues. Agreement does not show the presence of empathy. It is understanding that shows empathy. When Christ came to earth, it wasn't because he agreed with how everyone was living here, but he still came. So he understood, but that understanding did not lead to agreement. It did not lead to indulgence. It did not lead to excusing us. Rather, it did just the opposite. It provided a way for us to change the direction of our lives. What's the difference then between agreeing with someone and understanding someone? Well, you can agree with somebody and it doesn't really require you to have intentional curiosity. You can just ask a few kind of shallow questions and somebody says, oh yeah, I agree with you on this or that, or, what the other. And you can be, oh, okay, great. And you don't have to necessarily go any deeper than that. But true empathy requires an intentional curiosity to ask questions instead of assumptions. Again, one of the reasons that we see so many businesses fail or not succeed the way that they should or they could is because they get to a point that they start making assumptions instead of continuing to be curious and asking questions. And this is also true as a parent. We never want to get to the point that we stop being intentionally curious about our kids. Because I can tell you, as a mom who raised 5 boys and I home educated for 25 years, so I was around them pretty much 24/7. But there are things that I didn't know. There were things that I learned years later about my kids, either in terms of things they had done or things that they were thinking that I didn't know. And it wasn't because I wasn't present, and it wasn't because I wasn't curious. It's because it is impossible to ever fully know 100% what is in the heart and mind of any other human being. And sometimes we confuse proximity with intimacy, and that is a very, very dangerous thing to do. Proximity is not intimacy. One does not automatically flow from the other. Now, if you want to have intimacy with someone, then you're going to have proximity, but you're going to have more than that. You're going to have curiosity. I would say that proximity plus ongoing curiosity is part of the factors that lead to intimacy. Now, you need more than that. There does need to be some more than that, but definitely proximity alone is not enough. You've got to have that curiosity. One of the problems that we are having in our culture right now is we have fallen so much into these habits of assigning people labels and putting them in boxes. And we say, oh, this person or this people group or whatever is toxic. Oh, we just need to have boundaries because this person is toxic. And it becomes a very easy way to not practice empathy, to not understand where someone else is coming from. Probably for most of us, we might have other people looking at us, labeling us as toxic. When yes, are there people in life who can be what we might call toxic? Yes, but I think that the number of people who get labeled with that compared to those who really are is actually pretty small. There's a difference between people who are exasperating, who are difficult, who are complicated, who don't just pat us on the back and agree with us, and people that are truly toxic. And we are going down this path of just slapping labels on people that are difficult or things that are complicated. And rather than doing the emotional and mental and spiritual work of really diving in to understand someone and dealing with complex issues, we've just kind of been settling more and more for, we just get just enough information. Okay, we're going to label them. We're going to put them in a box. And we can do that with our kids, and not just in negative ways. We can also do that where we just stick these positive labels. And that's also something that we want to be careful of because people are complicated. People are complex. We do have patterns as individuals. And, God is a God of order and a God of patterns. And we see patterns all throughout creation, and we see patterns in human development. And that's one of the reasons that we're able to have certain frameworks, whether they're personality frameworks or frameworks that identify our strengths or our weaknesses in terms of different areas of work and all those types of things. Whether we're talking about strength finders or we're looking at working genius, Patrick Lencioni's, great program. All of those are different kinds of things that we can look at to be able to identify and recognize patterns. But no one person is an exact pattern that has no deviation from that. We see that in creation. So yes, there are animals who fall into these certain categories, but there's always these exceptions. Like, okay, yes, they meet 95% of the criteria to be a mammal, but then they have this one thing that just is like, but other mammals don't have this. So what do we do with these creatures? And I think that even in creation, that's a reminder to us that while God is a God of order and patterns, He's not a God of sameness. There is still uniqueness within us. So as we identify patterns in ourselves, whether it's with our kids, whether it's with employees or our customers or whatever, we want to be certain that we don't confuse patterns with labels. We use patterns to be able to understand human dynamics and development in order to be able to deal with the complexity of individuals, but not to just assign labels and, okay, that's who that person is. And so now we've got an easy label. And we don't then have to show up with as much curiosity, with as much attentiveness, with as much questions. Because then if we resort to labels, well, then, our assumptions are basically all that we need to do. So we don't want to do that. We want instead to understand people even when we don't agree with them. Empathy is also showing up because of who you are, not because people qualify for your presence or your action. Again, going back to the coming of Christ, the scripture tells us that Jesus came for us when? When we got our act together and we were all cleaned up and we had qualified and earned, his coming. No, not at all. It says that he came for us when? When we were still yet in our sin. That's when he came for us. Empathy is not, well, when that person gets their act together and when that person apologizes and when that person does XYZ, that's when I am going to show up with witness. That's not empathy. Empathy says, I'm going to show up because of who I am, not because you qualify for my presence or action. Now, one of the things that I talk about, if you listen to this podcast very much, one of the things that you'll hear me talk about is that every truth has a corollary truth, not a contradiction. And I'm not talking here about the difference between, well, there's good and then there's evil. No, every truth has another truth. And between those two truths, it creates a tension where a life of maturity exists. Now, I will tell you, it is far easier to just hold on to one truth and to not live in the tension that's created with the other one. But all truth has a corollary to it. And so empathy does not mean, again, it's not just this emotion. It's not saying, oh, I'm just going to indulge people and I'm just going to, it doesn't matter how they treat me or what they say or what they do. I'm going to be this kind, good person no matter what. Empathy is within the presence of all of the other aspects that make for a healthy life. Again, we go back to there's 6 elements that make life on earth possible, not just one. It's not just oxygen. We need all 6 in order to survive. And so empathy is oxygen, but it's not the only element that we need in our human relationships for them to thrive. Lastly, empathy begins with connection, not correction. Sometimes empathy leads to correction. Empathy, again, is not indulgence. And sometimes the most empathetic thing that you can do for someone, whether you are a parent, whether you have a direct report, whether you have a customer, whatever it is that you need to have a course correction. You need to correct the behavior of a child. You need to correct something that is wrong in your communication with your spouse. You need to have a correction with a team member. Correction and empathy are not opposites. Empathy doesn't cancel out correction. But what empathy does, it begins with connection. So as a parent, even when there's correction, it doesn't begin with anger. It doesn't begin with you messed things up. You messed up my plan. I'm mad at you. Why can't you get your act together? You're messing things up. That is not correction that comes from empathy. True correction begins with empathy. It's, oh man, I understand, why you made that choice. I understand, you're tired. I understand you're upset. I understand you're frustrated. I understand all of that. I'm still not going to excuse you slapping your sibling. I'm still not going to excuse that you lied. I'm still not going to excuse that you broke, curfew, and showed up late, for the 3rd time this week or, whatever. One of the things that Dr. Kevin Lehman has written a lot about in his parenting books is consequences with what? With empathy. So again, empathy begins with connection, even when it leads to correction. So it doesn't start with correction. And then after I've corrected you and you've gotten your act together, now I'll be with you. Now I will be present with you. It begins with connection. I was talking with someone recently and they were sharing with me how they were in a conflict with a spouse and they just were feeling very overwhelmed and very sad and very frustrated. And rather than just continuing to escalate this conflict, they stopped and they just said to their spouse, this is how I'm feeling right now. I'm feeling upset. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling sad. I'm just feeling very overwhelmed. My guess is that you might be feeling that way too. And the spouse came along and said, yeah, I am. And then together they just kind of made the decision to let's just set this aside for right now. And as they were sharing this with me, one of the things that I recognized was I said, they didn't just, yes, it would have been good to have said, hey, let me tell you how I'm feeling. But they took a step beyond that. They moved into empathy, because when they came to the side and said, my thought is that you might be feeling that way too, that was empathy in action. You can say to somebody, well, hey, let me just tell you, this is how I'm feeling. I'm feeling stressed and overwhelmed and irritated. And, I just need to step away from this. Okay. That's not necessarily empathy. You see, empathy goes one step further. And because this individual went one step further, they breathed life. They breathed oxygen into that relationship by going beyond just, this is how I think, this is how I feel. I'm going to come alongside. And did it immediately lead to some sort of mutual understanding and everything got worked out right in that moment? No, it didn't. But you know what it did? It breathed oxygen. It breathed some life into that relationship so that they could continue at a later time to come back and to address that conflict. With our children, it's so important that we have empathy with them, because it may still need correction and direction, but there's a difference if I'm standing here and you're looking opposite and we're opposing each other, and I'm coming around to your side to look at the situation with you. And even if I'm having to still give some hard words or some direction or correction, I'm doing that with you rather than just in opposition to you. Now, because I'm using this analogy of empathy is like oxygen, I just want to kind of point this out. The oxygen in the air that we breathe does not remain constant. Yeah, I'm currently training for a 5K race. And one of the things that has been really hard with this training is there have been so many days where the humidity and the dew point have been really, really high. And what that means is the water vapor in the air is really high. And when that happens, it actually reduces the oxygen molecules in the air, which means for every breath that I take, I'm sucking in less oxygen than when humidity and dew points are lower. And as that happens, then your heart has to work harder. And so your heart rate increases, and then you're not able to sweat as much. And so then your core body temperature goes up. And then what happens is that's making your heart work harder. And it also begins to pull blood away from your extremities, which increases the possibility of an injury. So it's not just like, oh, the high humidity or the high dew points are a pain. It's like, no, they have a real physiological impact. And sometimes in life, we go through situations where we're kind of in a circumstance or a stressful period where the oxygen in ourselves, and because of the life circumstances we're in, has been reduced. And so we want to be mindful of that there are times and seasons and circumstances that we go in that and they might, maybe there are things that are a result of maybe they're just things that got handed to us. And sometimes our capacity for empathy does get temporarily reduced. And when that happens, we don't just give up. We don't throw up our hands. We don't beat ourselves up. We recognize, okay, there's some vulnerability here to some damage in relationships, to some injuries or whatever. I'm not going to be sucking in as much oxygen as maybe I normally am. And so we just need to be mindful of that, and we adapt to those seasons. But what we don't want to do is make what becomes an adaptation period in time to become then just the ongoing way that we live as we begin to grow, as we begin to heal, as those situations either change, or if they don't change, that we begin to find new ways of adapting to those situations. Just like if somebody is running at high altitudes, then what does that mean? It doesn't mean that you have to give up running or walking or exercising at high altitudes. It means you have to train differently for that than at lower elevations. All right, my friend. So that is going to wrap us up for part 1 of this series, You're in the People Business. I invite you to go to my website, stephaniepresents.com. You can sign up there for my weekly newsletter. Also, if you have questions, if you have either as a parent or an application of this, you're welcome. There's a contact form on my website. You can send those to me. Empathy is one of the things that I write about in my book, The Great Brain Remodel of Adolescence, because if there's ever a time period in our kids' lives where they need our empathy, and again, empathy is not indulgence, it's not excusing all kinds of bad behavior, but to really understand how the physical remodel that occurs in the brain impacts them in ways that aren't obvious, that we don't typically think about, and we may not even know about. So you can also go to my website, stephaniepresents.com. You can click on resources and you can order that book as well. All right, my friend, remember this. You have an impact that is immeasurable, eternal, and irreplaceable. See you next time.
Thank you for listening. Visit the website, stephaniepresents.com, to join the mission of building spiritually strong, emotionally healthy, and relationally smart women and families. You can also book Stephanie to speak at your event and check out additional resources. Together, we can invite and equip generations to engage fully in God's grand story.